Okay, depending on your time zone, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. And thank you to everyone for joining us on the Scaling Pathways webinar today. We are going to kick off right on time because we have a lot to cover and not a lot of time to cover it in. So let's jump right in. I want to start off with one of my favorite quotes from this case study series. The quote that you see in front of you on the screen is from Reid Faz, the chair of the Vision Spring Board of Directors. Reid said to us, "Don't fall in love with your pretty little solution. Ask yourself, is it really working, or is it not going to achieve your goals?" And if your goal as a social enterprise is to reach hundreds of thousands or even millions of stakeholders, or to achieve transformative change, the answer to Reid's question is often no. But why? Why is scale so elusive? Why is it so hard to achieve? And what can we learn from the scaling journeys of others? We will be diving into those questions and many more during today's webinar. I'm your host, Erin Worsham. I'm calling in from Durham, North Carolina, where I lead the Center for the Advancement of Social Entrepreneurship, or CASE, at Duke University. We have a great agenda today and also a fantastic audience with several hundred people joining us from all over the world. So we wanted to start by getting you engaged and seeing who's here today. So for those of you that are logged into WebEx on your computer, and you'll see a screen that looks similar to this slide in front of you. So everyone now, join with me. Take your mouse and click on the chat button in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. Then at the bottom, use the drop-down box to toggle to all participants or everyone. And in the chat box you see in front of you, type in your name, your organization, and the location that you're calling in from. There you go, I just submitted mine. So it is literally that easy. This is not a trick question. We won't be cold calling you, so don't be afraid to put your name in there. But type in your name, your organization, and your location and hit enter. And we're excited to see where everyone's calling from around the world. As you're doing that, now that you're figuring out how to use the chat function on today's webinar, that will come in handy throughout the next hour. We will be collecting questions over the course of the next hour through that chat function. So if you have a question while I'm speaking or while any of the other speakers are talking, please feel free to add that to the chat. We'll also be collecting questions from Twitter and from email. And at the end of this webinar, we'll have our panelists answer a few of those questions. Of course, we won't be able to get to them all today, but we'll promise to follow up after this webinar with an email with answers to additional questions that were posed. So while you're typing your names, keep on doing that, but let me take a moment to explain what the Scaling Pathways series is. The Scaling Pathways series that we're here to talk about today explores the strategies that leading social enterprises have taken to scale their social impact. Now, there are many fantastic frameworks on scaling that are available, and we talk about some of those frameworks in our papers. But what we wanted to do with the Scaling Pathways series was to build on those frameworks and dive deeper to get the lessons from the trenches. So beyond the frameworks, when the rubber hits the road and social enterprises are doing the hard work of scaling, what works and what doesn't? So in this series, what you'll find is Pivoting to Impact, which is an overview paper of sorts which distills critical lessons learned from the social enterprises that we studied, and in-depth case studies that tell the stories of 3 social enterprises, Amazon, Evidence Action, and Vision Spring, and details their scaling strategies, successes, and failures. These 4 documents will be released today alongside this webinar. You'll receive an email after the webinar with a link, or you can go directly to scalingpathways.com. Our goal for today's webinar is to give you a teaser of the rich content that is included in these 4 documents, and then let you read more once you download those documents. And we also acknowledge that this is just the beginning. So these are the initial tools in the Scaling Pathways series, and over time, we'll add more tools and insights. Our team here at CASE developed this work, but we did not do it alone. So Scaling Pathways is funded and supported by the Innovation Investment Alliance, a funding and learning partnership between the Skoll Foundation and USAID's Global Development Lab with support from Mercy Corps. Collectively, the IIA has invested $50 million in 8 social enterprises that are seeking to scale. This is an incredible collaborative that we have been fortunate to work with. And although you won't hear their voices today, representatives from Skoll, USAID, and Mercy Corps are all on the call and on the webinar with us today. So thank you to all of them who are listening in. So if the name of our collective work is Scaling Pathways, we thought it would be interesting to learn from you about what the word scaling brings to mind. So we asked you in a pre-webinar survey to give us 3 words that come to mind when you think of scale. And here's what you said. You'll see the word cloud in front of you on the screen. Obviously, the words that certainly stand out are impact, growth, expansion. There's other interesting words like size, deeper, sustainability. And then some of my favorite words are the words that show how incredibly difficult the scaling process is. So words like hard, complexity, and one of my favorites, which I thought was creative, chess. So what did we find in our work on the Scaling Pathways project? What comes to mind when we talk about scale in Scaling Pathways? First, that scaling social impact is about more than organizational size or growth. As Sally Osberg and Roger Martin said in their book, Getting Beyond Better, scale is not determined by an organization's size or budget, but by the change it helps to usher in. And you'll see that point driven home in some of the case studies in this series. What you'll definitely see in the case studies in this series is the second point, that the journey to scaled impact is not linear, but involves many pivots and twists and turns and U-turns and stops and goes along the way. It is anything but linear. There are also multiple paths that you can pursue to achieve scale. For example, organic growth is certainly one path, but there's also partnering, open source sharing, advocacy, and much, much more. So there are many paths to achieve scale. And finally, along the way, social enterprises often face common roadblocks on the road to scale. Now, we'll hear more about those roadblocks later on in this webinar from our esteemed set of panelists. So why don't we pause now to meet those fantastic panelists? So we've asked our 3 speakers that are joining us for the call today to introduce themselves and their scaling journey very briefly. We've given them 4 questions that they each need to answer in an attempt to give the quick introduction and very brief executive summary of their scaling work that they did with the IIA. So why don't we start off with Ella Goodwin from Vision Spring. Ella, can you introduce yourself? Ella, if you're talking, you're still on mute. Okay, why don't we pause and come back to Ella. Andy, would you like to introduce yourself? Can we start with you?
Okay, this is Andy Narracott, sound check. Is it okay?
Great, go ahead.
Great. Well, hi everyone. My name is Andy Narracott. I am Deputy Director for Global Safe Water at Evidence Action. Our goal at Evidence Action is to scale proven, rigorously evaluated development solutions to benefit millions of people around the world. And through dispensers for safe water, we dramatically expand access to safe water at an extremely low cost. Okay, next one. So in a nutshell, our Innovation Investment Alliance scaling story was this. So we were funded to scale dispensers for safe water in Uganda, and we thought we were ready to scale. So this was based on a randomized controlled trial in Kenya, and having completed a successful pilot in eastern Uganda, we found that our chlorine dispensers and our process to provide community education were pretty cost effective and led to high usage rates of chlorine. So with the funds from the Innovation Investment Alliance, we threw everything into the expansion, and we began to install many more dispensers across Uganda. But over time, our adoption rate began to drop. So we made the strategic decision to stop expansion and instead go really deep in our existing communities to achieve greater impact without having to rapidly expand the number of dispensers. So one word to describe our scaling journey, I've said it before, I'll say it again, it is zigzaggy. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you, Andy. I love, just with Andy's accent, hearing him say the words zigzaggy. So Evidence Action and the Dispensers for Safe Water program had a zigzaggy journey to scale, and we're excited to learn more about that today and through the case study. Why don't we switch over to Carlos? Carlos, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, testing the sound is okay?
Great, go ahead.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm Carlos Souza, Senior Researcher at Amazon. Our goal at Amazon is to promote sustainable development in the Amazon, Brazilian Amazon. And of course, one of the problems that we face is deforestation. So we are really tackling this problem to stop deforestation in the region. And we do that through research, support for public policy formulation, broad dissemination of information, and capacity building. Our IIA scaling story is we knew since the beginning that stopping deforestation was a big challenge. And then we decided to engage all stakeholders at the municipal level to work on this problem. Our specialty is based on monitoring deforestation. We leverage open source geospatial and satellite imagery data, and also engage in this multi-stakeholder partnership at the state and municipal level, including governments, private sector, and civil society organizations. Within those partnerships, we have many roles. I'd like to highlight a few. We help to build an environmental management and monitoring cadastral system for the municipalities. We trained a lot of people to use the information to combat deforestation. And we implemented land use practice, best practice, to demonstrate that it's possible to develop social and economically the region without deforestation. Through the process, it became very clear for us that our special sauce is sourcing complex data in satellites, mapping, analyzing it through our skilled team, and creating high-quality reports. Through our journey, we ask questions like, what do we know about what is happening with deforestation? And the answer was, let's monitor this at near real time and quickly inform the stakeholders. How can we share and communicate that information with partners? So we need to prepare information in different formats, very compelling and practical way, and reach out, especially decision-making process. And questions like, which partners are the best? position to help us. In this case, we decided to work closely with municipalities. The word that describes our scaling journey is flexibility. Thank you.
Flexibility, I love that. That's a great word, Carlos. So thank you for that introduction, Carlos, and for all the work that you do. And now let's switch back to Ella. I think we've got the audio fixed. So Ella, would you introduce yourself? Ella, do we have you there? Let's make sure that your mute's off.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
There we go. There you are, Ella. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
I'm here. Okay, great. So I'm Ella Goodwin. I'm president of Vision Spring. Our goal is to create access to affordable eyewear everywhere. And if you are wearing your eyeglasses today, I would say take your eyeglasses off for 5 minutes and just think about the productivity lost in your day. And our objective is to be able to get eyeglasses to people who earn less than $4 a day around the world so that we can unleash their productivity and income earning potential and the ability to succeed in school. So briefly, our IIA scaling story is we were funded to scale up a hub and spoke retail model for the sale of eyeglasses in Central America. And we thought we were ready to begin to replicate the model because we had 5 stores and they were already working well, and that with additional funding, we would be able to open more stores and serve more people. And as we went into our replication, we started to run into some problems. We had some leadership and staffing changes that were disruptive, but really the main issue for us was as we had set ourselves the objective of being 100% of achieving 100% cost recovery, serving the low-income consumer. But as our team really focused on that cost recovery, we started to see a creeping up in our average ticket price from $13 to $15 to $20, and in fact, after 18 months, we were all the way up at $35 a pair. And for us, that really meant that in our drive for sustainability, we were actually drifting up market and we were coming off mission. And as we were working on the program, we were sinking a huge amount of leadership time into trying to get the infrastructure and right and standardizing our processes and getting our information systems in place. And it would be fair to say that the project was absorbing about 80% of our management time, but it was only yielding 20% of our total unit sales across the organization. And we really saw this as a huge opportunity cost, both in terms of time and dollars, particularly compared with other models that we were working on in other geographies. So 18 months into the project, we made a really hard choice with our board of directors to pivot hard. And we called our donors to tell them that we would stop the store rollout, that we had made a choice to close the Central America operations, and we offered to give them their money back. So the one word that we would describe in our scaling journey, I think, is experimental.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ella. And Vision Spring's story clearly is an incredibly interesting one of the pivots on the road to scale, but making really smart choices about how we can achieve impact at scale faster and better and more efficiently. So Vision Spring is a great example of that. So thank you to all 3 of our speakers. It's so interesting to me to hear their answers on their one word to describe their scaling journey. We had zigzaggy from Andy and the Evidence Action team, flexibility from Carlos and Imazan, and experimental from Ella and the Vision Spring team. So very interesting words there. We're truly grateful to the 3 of them for the work that they do every day and for the lessons that they've allowed us to share through these 3 case studies and the Pivoting to Impact paper. Based on their experiences, in Pivoting to Impact, we describe 5 common roadblocks that social enterprises often face on the road to scale, and tips on how to overcome those roadblocks. So these roadblocks are detailed in the Pivoting to Impact paper with lots of examples and additional information. But what we wanted to do today was just give a very brief overview and description of those 5 roadblocks. And then we're going to have Andy, Ella, and Carlos each talk about one of those roadblocks briefly, talk about their experience. Our goal here is to tease everybody on this WebEx with some really interesting information that you'll want to go download the papers and read more, just because we don't have enough time to dig into all of it today. So let me start off with just talking very briefly about the 5 roadblocks on the road to scale. So first, the first roadblock is starting without gas. So this is about social enterprises not having the right foundations in place in order to make scaling successful. Scaling is resource intensive and time consuming, and you need to have those foundations in place, the people, the systems, the infrastructure that are critical for scale. So roadblock number 1 is starting without gas, starting without those foundations. Second is driving blind. This is about not having the clear processes and tripwires or metrics in place that will indicate to your social enterprise when something is not quite right on your scaling journey and it's time to pivot. So if we can avoid driving blind, we'll have those tripwires in place to let us know if something's not right and let's pivot to achieve greater impact. Third is sticking to the map. What we found is that funders and social ventures are often very comfortable experimenting and iterating during the pilot phase, but not as much once we move past pilot into the process of actually trying to scale. But certainly through these 3 case studies and all of the other social enterprises and ventures that we've spoken with, maintaining some of that iteration and adaptation is critical throughout the scaling process. Number 4, the 4th roadblock is traveling alone. So on that road to scale, not taking advantage of partnering with others so that as your social enterprise matures, you can actually do less better because you're doing so in partnership with others, and together you can achieve scale faster and better. And finally, the 5th roadblock is ignoring the 30,000-foot view. So we found that often social ventures don't zoom out from the day-to-day operational details. It is so easy as you're trying to scale to get very narrowly focused on the ground, on the day-to-day operational details of getting your work correct. But we need to also take the opportunities to zoom out and see the big picture opportunities that are evolving around us, and also the opportunity costs. So as Ella alluded to, there were big opportunity costs for Vision Spring in El Salvador. By spending all of that time and resources in El Salvador and in Central America, they couldn't use those resources in other parts of the world where they could reach more people and have more impact. So zooming out to see those opportunities and opportunity costs are so critical. So as I said, there's much more detail about those 5 roadblocks in the paper, the Pivoting to Impact paper, and the 3 case studies. But we'll briefly talk about 3 of those today and ask our social enterprise leaders to share their tips based on their own journeys. So why don't we start with driving blind? And I'd like to ask Andy to share part of the Evidence Action Dispensers for Safe Water story. Andy, we know that social enterprises need navigational tools to help them on the road to scale. Tell us a little bit more about the tripwires that Evidence Action put into place to help Dispensers for Safe Water drive toward both impact and financial sustainability in Uganda.
Hey, thanks, Erin. I'd be delighted to, because this part of Dispensers for Safe Water is what most attracted me to Evidence Action. So Dispensers for Safe Water was on course to meet our grant goals in terms of numbers of dispensers. So that is physical infrastructure on the ground. But to reach our vision for impact and financial sustainability, adoption rates were our key metric. And so by adoption rates, we mean actual usage of chlorine by users in the field. So the way we measure adoption at Evidence Action, which is crucial to actually verifying that there's chlorine in the water, because if there's chlorine in the water, then we can assume there's the health impact, because there's lots of evidence that clearly links water treatment to improved health. We visit households on unannounced visits and take a sample of their drinking water and test it for chlorine in the drinking water. So we do this with a very simple tool that we can do there and then. It takes a couple of minutes at the household. We do this on a bi-monthly basis. We visit around 3,000 households a month because we're at significant scale already, but we take 1.5% of all of our dispensers. And this is also, we can have instant feedback, which is a sort of tripwire that tells us if something is not as it should be. And then if something does crop up, like we're seeing some drop in adoption for some unbeknownst reason that month, then we can quickly act accordingly and put in measures to address it. The other thing just to mention is that we have this results-based financing model. So through carbon credits, that is also another sort of tripwire that keeps us focused on our adoption rates. And it's not just for the sake of impact, but also because we could not stay financially sustainable if we couldn't demonstrate that more people were using chlorine. So you see, we have to track people using chlorine to make the case to regulators on the number of people who are not burning fossil fuels in order to clean their water, which was the only available alternative for many. So those are a couple of the tripwires we've built into Dispensers Safe Water as we scaled to reach 5 million people in East Africa. Over to you, Erin. Thanks.
That's great, Andy. Thank you for talking a little bit about those tripwires and how important the usage rates or the adoption rates are for the success of dispensers for safe water, not only in terms of the impact that you're trying to achieve, but then that alignment with your results-based financing model through carbon credits. So Andy, you started to talk about this a little bit in your intro, but I would love for those folks that have not read the case study yet to talk just in a little bit more detail about, as those tripwires in Uganda were telling you that the adoption rates were decreasing, what happened? Tell us a little bit about what Evidence Action did then.
Yeah, so thanks, Erin. So as we were throwing everything into scale, we had all of our processes well streamlined. It was quite a straightforward process to start scaling, and that's what we were doing. So as we started to get this feedback loop telling us that actually a lot of the adoption figures were not as high as the pilot initially suggested, we saw that there was some cracks starting to appear. So what we did is we put a halt on our expansion efforts. We had a very careful chat with our donors and other external stakeholders and said, look, we really need to put a pause on our growth at the moment and now look at some of the causes that are underlying this lower adoption rates. So that's what we did, and we obviously had a very understanding set of stakeholders. So what we did is we addressed some of our chlorine supply chain issues. So what we were finding is that a lot of the dispensers were having stockouts. So we really needed to improve and address our chlorine supply chain, this was actually bottles of liquid chlorine that we were manufacturing in a central location in the city in Uganda, and very rural distribution by lorry, and then finally motorbike, and then finally by foot to get the deepest rural parts of Uganda. So we had to really look at the chlorine supply chain. We had some staffing issues, so we had some leadership challenges, a little bit of transitions going on there. And then we also had some rumors appearing. So a lot of rumors appearing that, chlorine could make you infertile, that, there was some detrimental effects from chlorine, and actually this was a way for the government to control population growth. So we really had to sort of pull back and do a lot more education at the community level to help people understand the dangers of unsafe water and the benefits that chlorine were giving to them. And then we started to see a dramatic turnaround as well. Really great, seeing down from a low of 20% up to 60% adoption in a short period of time.
Fantastic, in a very short period of time. So I encourage everyone to read the evidence action case study because it is so interesting to see how they very thoughtfully didn't just quote unquote drive blind in pursuit of the metrics that they had received grant funding to pursue. So it wasn't just about building and installing a certain number of dispensers and continuing to expand that number, but to say if we're really about having impact, which is about health outcomes for our stakeholders, then just having a dispenser in a community doesn't matter. It's whether people are using that. So let's take a pause, stop this expansion of our dispensers, and double down where we are. Not put new dispensers in, but make sure that we're doing the things we need to do to increase adoption rates within our existing communities. And then once we get that right, we can start to grow again. So really fascinating story from Andy. Let's move on to one of the other roadblocks, which is traveling alone. Along the road to scale, there are changing conditions that may require different drivers or vehicles, and the stories of these social enterprises have helped us learn that organizations should regularly assess their specific roles to determine what could make their journey smoother or faster. Now, Carlos, in pursuing critical partnerships, Amazon had to get really clear on what your unique value is and how you could leverage partnerships to achieve more impact. So tell us a little bit about letting go of certain roles that you once played and how that actually helped you get further on the road to scaled impact.
Hi, Eric. Thanks for the question. Yeah, interesting. Amazon will be 27 years old in July, and we had different phases in the organization. In the beginning, the first 5-10 years, we focused a lot on research, scientific research, applied research, because we want to demonstrate that first we have to solve the problems, to understand the problems. What are the main causes of deforestation and other environmental problems? And we want to demonstrate that we need to have neutral information, high-quality information, and to open up the dialogue among different stakeholders. Now we still publish research papers, but we do less. So it was okay for us to move from this initial research think tank organization, and now we do more actions, but it's still based on research information. So another example, more recent example, in order to push the environmental agenda at the municipal level, we had to train local people to generate information, to use information generated by Amazon. So we created a GIS training center, and we trained more than 600 people, mostly in the state of Pará and other states as well, but focus on Pará state. And we decided later on to close the center because it was draining our energy a lot. And we saw that a lot of consulting firms were doing that kind of job. But most important thing, we helped to build the curriculum for the GIS information that is necessary to support the environmental management and monitoring at the municipal level. So those are two examples. A final example is a software development role. Amazon had to build up a system to support environmental management and monitoring at the municipal level to allow municipalities to take that role. So we had to hire programmers, and we developed the software, the system. But later on, we decided that Amazon cannot become an IT company, and we did a spin-off. So it's really part of our culture to understand when we have to play an action in particular area, and when we can move on. That's what we call organized abandonment. So letting go is part of our culture. And we decide that we have many special sauce, but one that is particularly important is producing trusted, neutral, high-quality data that tracks and reports quickly deforestation and connect that information to many stakeholders.
Great. Thank you, Carlos. I love that phrase of a culture of organized abandonment. And so as Carlos just mentioned, one of the things that really comes out in the case study about Amazon is that they have really, over the course of over 25 years, figured out that their special sauce is truly this being a trusted neutral source of high-quality data and analysis around deforestation and other sustainable development issues. And so Amazon has used that special sauce as their core of what we need to do is be this trusted source of high-quality data and analysis, and then find the right partners that can help take that data analysis and create enforcement mechanisms, create tools and reporting to drive down deforestation of the Brazilian Amazon. My favorite quote in the Amazon case study is from one of the co-founders of Amazon, who said, "We are not the heroes of the Amazon. We have a big vision, but know that we are part of a village." And I think that's such an astute point from Amazon to be able to take on something so huge as deforestation and try to drive that agenda forward effectively. So with that, let's move on to the third roadblock that we'll dive into briefly here, sticking to the map. Now, sometimes social enterprises attempting to navigate the road to scale are headed in the right direction, and at other times, alternative roads are required in order to effectively and efficiently reach the ultimate destination. Ella, I know that Vision Spring has taken new roads several times, and in Central America, Vision Spring, as you mentioned in your introduction, decided to end the journey altogether and put your resources into other roads and other paths forward. So tell us a little bit more about how you and the Vision Spring team follow the guiding principle that I love that you all have, which is constantly adapt, relentlessly improve. Talk to us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, thanks for that, Erin. So as we think about our North Star, right, what is the problem that we're trying to solve? There are 624 million people in the world who are vision impaired, and they can have their vision corrected with a simple pair of eyeglasses. And so the size of that problem requires us not to think about success in tens of thousands of people or hundreds of thousands of people, but really to think about success in millions of people. And so as we were really looking at what was happening in Central America, you know, in one way the numbers were looking quite good. We screened 40,000 people. We had corrected the vision of 26,000 people. We had some really good revenue, and retail, of course, can be very, very powerful, but we weren't really set up. Our special sauce at the beginning was not to be a real franchisor specialist. And we knew that if we were going to really try to blow out the numbers and start to get it really big and really right, it was going to require a couple more $1 million of additional investment. And when we were looking at some of the other models that we were working on, so we had been, to hold on to the word experimenting, we had been experimenting with a couple of other models, which were following a third-party payer and a wholesale model. And we were able to really reach many more people and with less philanthropic dollars. And so if our North Star wasn't to make retail successful, our North Star was to get many more people who are living on less than $4 a day really into their first pair of glasses. And that mission-centric orientation is really what allowed us to pull up to 30,000 feet and to say, you know, is this the road that we want to travel on? Do we want to keep pushing? And I think some people might say, well, you know, you might ask, did we experiment long enough? Did we did we give the retail model the opportunity to succeed? Maybe we exited too soon, or maybe what could have happened, though, I think what we were really concerned about, and one of the main conversations we had at the board was, we're burning this money, and everyone at the board meeting that was making this decision said, if this was your money, would you keep investing in this initiative? If this was your money, would you keep investing in this initiative? And everybody was asked to go around the table and said, well, look, if we here at this table wouldn't keep spending our money on it, why would we keep spending our donors' money on it? And so we felt like we didn't want to exit too late. And so it was really the focus on, how do we hold in constructive tension our business targets, our need for revenue, our need for unit sales, but also hold penultimate our social impact, and how do we get glasses on the faces of millions of people and really get people into their first pair. So what that led us to do was we pivoted to exploring 3 business models. We held on to our retail operation in India. We kept it small. We made it more efficient by clustering them into tight regional clusters so they were easier to manage. We made them more efficient by hosting them in hospitals where we had less capital expenditure on things like rent and equipment. But we really also decided that we were willing to relinquish some of our control and begin to leverage the distribution channels of other organizations, and really to expand through wholesale relationships that we coupled with sell-through support with healthcare institutions, community health work networks, literacy programs, government initiatives. And one of the most successful of those has been introducing eyeglasses into community health networks. And in particular, we've done this in Bangladesh with BRAC, and we're super excited to say that in 2016, we screened our 4 millionth person, and we sold our 1 millionth pair of eyeglasses. And that was a long journey. It took us 10 years to get there, but right now we're doing about 250,000 pairs a year just through that one partnership in that one location. So as we looked at opportunity costs and we looked at our North Star, one of the key decision points that came out of the El Salvador and Central America experience was, what are the metrics that tell us that we are on the right road? And we really pulled back off of the 100% cost recovery target, and we have created for ourselves a new metric, which is the philanthropic investment per pair. And this is really our key focus. It keeps us focused on efficiency. And the idea is, how do we deliver each new pair of glasses, or for anybody, how do we deliver our each output with less philanthropic revenue? And so what we've been able to do by experimenting in parallel, by allowing ourselves to switch course, is we have been able to drive down that philanthropic investment per pair from just under $8 in 2010 to $4.37 last year per corrective pair. And when we think about corrective pair, it can't be a corrective pair to the middle income consumer. We're really focused on corrective pairs for first-time wearers and for people who are earning less than $4 a day. So that has been really, allowing ourselves to pivot and to change course has actually allowed us to grow year on year, such that 16 over 15, we grew 54%. 16 over 15, we grew 25%. We're aiming at another 25% this year, and we should get just over 900,000 people into glasses this year.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Ella. Lots of great pieces of advice and nuggets from the Vision Spring story in your discussion there, and obviously a lot more detail behind all of those in the case study. But really an excellent example of this idea of not sticking to the map. So Vision Spring very intentionally is taking many paths and struggling, as you heard in Ella's words, struggling with the core of social entrepreneurship and enterprise, of finding the balance balance of reaching impact and also maintaining sustainability for your organization and the work. And Ella gave a great example of their new philanthropic investment per pair as a good way for them to be able to manage both the impact and the sustainability to guide their decision-making around programs and pathways and when they need to pivot. And I love Ella's point about, asking her and the leadership team and the board saying, if this was your money, what would you do? It really brings that decision-making process home. So again, those were just, scratching the surface on some of the takeaways and advice from these enterprises on these roadblocks to scale. We want to take just a few minutes to answer questions, so continue to type those in your chat box. Robin's been manning the host chat box and has been getting some great questions through that and through email and other places. So we'll try to answer just a few questions here. One that I thought was interesting was, I think throughout the last 45 minutes, we've been really focused on the perspective of the entrepreneur and the social enterprise. And what is the advice and the lessons learned from that perspective. We also have funders on the call, and so there was a question of, from the perspective of the three leaders of social enterprises that we're hearing from today, what's the one piece of advice that you would give to funders that are trying to fund scale? So if we've got quick pieces of advice, we'll try to get to all three of you, but we'll see how that goes. Why don't we start with Andy? Do you got an answer to that? We're one piece of advice for funders trying to scale. And let me caveat, the answer can't be give more money. We know that's everybody's answer. What else?
Okay, well, if we can't choose money, so I would encourage them to look hard at the evidence. So, as we mentioned, it's fine to measure the impact using the output, whatever that may be, that the social enterprise is delivering, but only measuring the output at the sake of the impact is a mistake, I think. It's fine to measure the output if there's evidence that clearly links that output to the desired impact, whether that be health, economic productivity, or whatever. But there needs to be strong evidence, and by strong evidence, we're talking ideally randomized controlled trials, but I appreciate not everyone can do that, but a careful look at biases in surveys, what is the counterfactual of not doing this intervention, is the survey independently verified? So I think it's too often taken as too often assumed that an impact is proven. But I would encourage funders to do their due diligence, make sure that there is a body of evidence that rigorously links that intervention to the desired impact.
Great, thanks, Andy. Carlos, what about you? Do you have any advice for funders that you want to share?
Yeah, I have a couple of advice. I think flexibility is there in the advice for them as well, because during the execution of the project, we find alternatives, and sometimes it's not easy to shift to new alternatives to reach our goal. A few donors that we work with are really flexible, and of course, based on what Andy just said, the evidence is there. We can show there is a better way to do. I think donors can have more flexibility and help us to change the course if it's necessary. The second one is be more patient, because what's happening, in most cases now, the projects are like 1-2 year old. I mean 1-2 year project to execute, and scaling issues takes a little more time. So it's very rare to have projects like designed for 3 or 4 years. I know it's complicated to fund that long now, but we need to have more time. That's a good example. Our project, we had enough time to go through all the steps to reach out to the behavioral change desired. And this is in the scaling, that's really critical. Once we reach out to this point that there is a behavioral change, the scaling can happen. I can report that many municipalities in other states in the Amazon are seeking for funds, and they are also investing to expand the successful case that we had in the state of Pará.
Great, thank you, Carlos. Very, very helpful to hear both yours and Andy's perspectives on the advice for funders. Ella, I am sure you have tons of advice for funders. I actually want to throw you a curveball. We got an interesting question in that I would love to have you tackle. So someone from our group here today was asking, how does each organization define or determine the unit that is going to be scaled? And so for you in Vision Spring, since you have so many different pathways and models that you're testing and experimenting with at all times around the world, how do you think about that question of determining what the unit is? What are the parameters of that unit that you're going to try to scale?
Yeah, thanks for that. Okay, so that's a good one. So as we think about scale and we think about the path to scale, we think about first beginning with expansion. And expansion is the promise of the investment that needs to be made with the promise of growth. And that sort of, you get like to oversimplify, you get like a 2-to-1 inputs to outputs. Then, you know, if that yields and things are working and the hypotheses and the assumptions are proving out, we kind of go into growth stage. And there we get like a 1-to-1 ratio of investment to output. And, you know, to Andy's point, there's a connection to outcome, but just for the simplicity of talking about it. And then when things really when we start to find efficiencies and points of leverage and the like, then we really think about that's where we get real economy of scale. And the real math of scale is that there's a growing output with an incremental or relatively steady level of input, and so you get this sort of 1-to-2 kind of a ratio. So as we think about what so designing for scale for us really starts at the very beginning of that journey, which is what are we expanding upon? How are we expanding? And we're in the process of doing this right now. And first, I just want to say, you know, when it comes to our donors, we are so blessed to have a community of donors who are with us on what is really a learning journey, and it's their ability to maintain with us an open dialogue that allows us to be really brutally honest. And a real thanks goes to IIA because because IIA has stayed with us from a funding point of view, even though we pivoted, and we're actually investing in a new plan together. And what comes at the heart of this new plan is how we're going to expand our wholesale model. And as we think about the minimum replicable business unit, so in order to go into a new geography, what is the minimum requirement with regard to people, information systems, supply chain and logistics, the actual product, which is for us, of course, it's eyeglasses, but what selection of product, the price points of those, how we're going to deal with price points, and how we deal with the service of delivering those glasses, particularly with sell-through support, marketing, and training. And so thinking about the path to scale from what element of the business unit is being replicated. For us, what does it take to have a minimum replicable business unit? What does that business unit look like? And how easy is it to stamp that out into new geographies? And so that's one way to think about it. The other way we think about it is what is the smallest thing that we are trying to do most often? And we as the communal we as not just Vision Spring, but what is it that all of our partners are trying to do? And the one thing everybody has to do to get a glass on somebody's face is to screen and to do, even if we're just talking about reading glasses, to do a vision acuity, and to do a very, very basic screening for blurry near vision. And so we think about, from a business expansion point of view, our minimum replicable business unit. And then the path to scale for us is to get many, many more points of dispensing and distribution. And all of those points have to have the capability to do a very basic vision screening. So those are the 2 points of the minimum replicable unit or the minimal replicable activity that have to be undertaken for us to be able to scale.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ella. It's a great question about how do you define the unit being scaled, and a really complex answer that is different for every organization, and again, is something that you need to iterate and adapt on over time to make sure that you're defining that unit correctly and continuing to tweak that as you scale. So looking at the clock, we have just 5 minutes left. This time has gone very quickly. So what I want to do is ask one last quick question of our panelists, and then I'll just spend a minute wrapping up and talking about next steps. So for all 3 of our panelists, if you have a quick response to this question, what's the one thing you wish you knew before or as you were starting on the road to scale? So what's the one thing you wish you knew? Share that with the group. Let's go in the order that we started before: Andy, then Carlos, then Ella, and then I'll close out. So Andy, kick us off.
Yes, hi. So the one thing that I wish we knew was that that the communities in which we were working were strongly influenced by rumors. And I think some of the assumptions that we took was that one big education push at the beginning was sufficient then to sort of drive a continuous user adoption growth. But we were wrong. There's many different shocks that can happen to a very complex system, from both external shocks and internal shocks. That's within evidence action and outside, within governments, within communities, political elections, with weather events. All of those things make a very complex system, and I think it's thanks to the system that we had set up, that with those tripwires, that allowed us to respond very quickly to those tripwires.
That's great, Andy. So interesting points about really understanding the drivers of behavior change in the communities in which you're working, and then having the systems and looking out for those shocks, internal and external, that are going to happen, and be looking for them and be ready to be prepared to adapt as those shocks happen. Carlos, what about you? What's the one thing you wish you had known?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm thinking here there are many things, but I would choose, I wish I knew more about the role of supply chain in this process. So we had producers and local industry involved in the control of deforestation at the municipal level. Looking at the multi-stakeholder approach, I think we covered many important actors. But I think the big corporations, global corporations, commodities, they could be more connected in this project. So now, of course, we are facing this a new challenge. We have a framework to work at the municipal level, and we need a jurisdictional approach, because we know all this process doesn't happen only at the boundary of a municipality. It's a cross-boundary issue. We are clustering municipalities, and next challenges is to create this concept of zero deforestation in agricultural production. And in supply chain overall is really interested in this kind of thing. But yeah, I would love to have that possibility to engage since the beginning, the big corporation in the project.
I love that. So the role of the entire supply chain in the ecosystem of the problem you're solving. Ella, what about you? Bring us home with your quick one thing, and then I'll close out.
So I want to build on something that Carlos had said earlier, which is the idea about flexibility and understanding not having a crystal ball on how it's all going to play out over the course of 3 years. And I think, you know, the standard of our budgeting processes and proposal templates and all that stuff really lends us all to have to put one number. You know, we're going to do X in year 1 and X, Y in year 2 and in year 3. And I think if we had known and really pushed ourselves to really consider performance ranges, to say here's the high possibility, but here's the pessimistic possibility, we might have sort of dashed our own expectations a little less hard, but really importantly, wouldn't have. You know, I think one of the hardest things about going back to people to say it's not working out is to be able to live up to not having lived up to the expectation that we had set for ourselves, and not having been able to capture the opportunity and the possibility, and to have really materialized that possibility that we saw as possible as the potential. And so I would say having just a really open dialogue at the very beginning for what happens when it doesn't look good, what is the pessimistic scenario up front, and then in addition to what the likely or rosy scenario might look like.
I love that. Thank you, Ella. Fantastic piece of advice for people starting their scaling journeys. So we have just scratched the surface of the wisdom from the scaling journeys of Vision Spring, Evidence Action, and Amazon. To dive more deeply and learn more, you can download the Pivoting to Impact paper and all 3 case studies at scalingpathways.com. And we will also follow up with an email to everyone that registered for this event to provide the links to those papers. If you have any additional questions, ideas, or thoughts from your own scaling journeys, or questions in addition to what you've submitted here today that you're curious to know more about on the scaling journey and would like us to dig into as we continue the Scaling Pathways project, let us know. Tweet us at CaseAtDuke. Contact us through our website, www.caseatduke.org, and be sure to use the hashtag Scaling Pathways when you're on Twitter or Facebook or other social media. Thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate your time and are excited for you all to download the Scaling Pathways series and learn more about the wonderful work of the IIA and Vision Spring, Evidence Action, and Amazon. Thank you so much and have a good day.